Hello, this is Expressman, and welcome to part 2 of our basic Stormworks build. We left off with a basically ready to go white hull, and we're going to now add power to it, make it so this thing can go. That's pretty fundamental to anything you build in Stormworks, so let's do it. Now, engines are another opportunity for you to be mistakenly intimidated. There are several things about engines that you need to do and get right, but it is not difficult. It is well within your grasp, and it is enjoyable when you get the hang of it. So I did a section plane on the green axis so that we can just get in here to the guts section. Now, if you remember, our boat is rather front heavy, so we are going to keep the engine to the back as much as possible, and fuel also. Part of the engine is we need to figure out where the propeller is going to go. We have a couple different options for propulsions. Let me hit tab. There's the azimuth thruster, which isn't a bad option. There is, of course, like the really big propellers, which would be just ridiculous on this thing. Yeah, don't recommend that one. But there is, of course, the basic small propeller. There's also water jets. Those are pretty fun, but those are going to be outside the scope of this video. So we're going to grab the small propeller. We also kind of need to decide if we need one or two. Honestly, for this size boat, we only need one. We also then need to make the decision how high or how low. Low has the advantage of the boat is blocking less water. It flows through the propellers easily, if you're building a boat so that it planes, which means rides above the water, you definitely want the propeller to be as low as possible. But part of the problem is if we were to mount this propeller and hook it all up and power it and take this out in the water, our boat would rise dramatically in the front. In fact, it would be ridiculous because you're putting pressure on the bottom edge. You're not putting pressure in the middle. You're putting, in relation to our pink box here, our center of mass, we're pushing beneath the center of mass, which essentially will cause the entire boat to yaw up toward the air. That's not a good thing. So in general, with the exceptions I just listed, we want to keep the propeller higher if we can. So we could go here, and that might be the best idea, but I'm going to go ahead and go here. And so I'm just going to go, why is it does not like referencing. Okay, there we go. There it is. There is our propeller. A single propeller should do it. Oh, my section plane's just being all kinds of problem right now. Now we could do a couple things here to sort of clean up the back. I'm not going to go way too crazy, but at a very simple minimum, we could add like these shapes to just make it look more natural, and you can imagine water pulling up through there a little easier. We could even take it one step further and add like an inverse block right there maybe, but it's just not necessary. All right, so let's leave that. We're also gonna need steering, and I'm gonna throw that in here right now. You have basically two good options for a small vessel. There's this rudder, which if I like it because it's very high performance, but the disadvantage of this rudder is that it is very bulky. So if we sort of had an angled stern here and we're able to pull that motor further up under the boat, it becomes very practical to drop this big piece out behind the motor. But with sort of a flat, like bulkhead style stern here, this type of rudder doesn't lend itself to that very well. So we're gonna grab this other rudder. I like it less. It's got worse performance in my opinion. However, it works with our design. So I'm going to go ahead and press X, Drag those 3 out, create the void there. We're going to press K, rotate, click. Now, we instantly created a problem. You might not know this, but if you look at the rotational indicators for these two, you can't see the ends of the arrows right now. Let me actually just drop another one in there and you'll see what I'm talking about. There we go. We won't keep these, but you can see both of them have the plus on the inside and the minus on the outside. That means when we hook these up to steering, they'll actually steer opposite of each other, because when they both steer toward the plus, you can see that they're not matching each other. They're actually opposing each other. So it is very important. I'm going to hit Control Z to remove that. I'm going to hit Control Z again to remove those. It's very important to turn symmetry off and place rudders and other highly rotational objects separately. I'm trying to remember which, the solid is plus. Okay, so if the solid is plus, I'm going to press L, rotate that up, and then I just have to hand place the other one in the same manner. So now you can see the solids and the empties match each other. The steering won't oppose each other. So that is great. Okay. Actually, while I am at it, I am going to place 2 more flaps vertically. We may or may not ever hook these up, but these will act as stabilizers, if I could press the right key. I think I want them to be upside down, maybe. And these may serve a purpose if we get as far as adding stabilization to the boat. It can compensate for some of that. I told you, the rudder pushing the stern down and the bow up. Stabilizers can help compensate for that. So I'm just going to throw those in there. May or may not hook them up before the series is over, but they're there in case we do. Let me turn symmetry back on, and you know what? I'm going to turn symmetry back off, because for the engine, we also don't really want to get into symmetry. Also, I would normally just use a section plane, but since we're just going to start with deleting that, get our engine in there, and we'll recover it. It's easy to do when we don't have a bunch of equipment and stuff on top yet. All right, so what do we need to do for an engine? Well, let's hit Tab, and I'll just scroll down to them. There are 2 kinds of engines. There are like ready to go engines. So here's the small engine. There is a medium and a large. These are essentially pre-builts. You can just drop them in, hook them up, and they're good to go. And then there is modular engines, in which you build the engine one piece at a time, 1 cylinder, 1 crankshaft section, 1 manifold. And there's a lot more to building modular engines, but they are rather fantastic. I like modular engines a lot. But we are going for, here they are, modular engines. There's a crankshaft, there's a clutch, there's a 3x3 cylinder, there's a 1x1 also. There's 3 sizes, but that is outside the scope of, I highly encourage you to get into them, but that is outside the scope of this video. We are going to just go with the vanilla. It's a good little engine. Now you can see with these components that we get some information on the side, like logical inputs like throttle. It's represented by a number, so we will have to send the engine a number for throttle. And there's outputs like revolutions per second, RPS, and temperature. So if we wanted to gauge the engine's temperature, we know the engine can actually output its temperature. And then there's a bunch of connections, and these actually concern us most, which is power. That's the crankshaft, essentially, as well as air, coolant out, fuel, coolant in, and exhaust, and of course electric. And that is what we're going to tackle right now. So if you look here, it has on the top is the crankshaft. Let me rotate it. Now it's on the back is the crankshaft, and then we have 5 connections on top. So we're going to want to install this engine. We have some considerations on where we put it. It won't let me place it, if you can hear that, because there's nothing actually for it attached to when it's rotated like this. So I'm going to grab my basic block, And we're just going to build a little support bulkhead wall. Grab that engine again. Now we can place it. I'm not completely convinced this is where I want to place it because I got to figure out gearbox, clutch. Gearbox takes 1, second gearbox takes 1, clutch takes 2, alternator takes 1. So we actually could come back 1 on this. Because as we talked about the weight issue before, I want this back as far as possible. So in this situation, that is back as far as possible, unless I do something really creative with the shaft. I suppose I could, but I'm not going to. So the drive shaft. So let us, we got to connect all of these things up now. What I'm going to do is go to tab, and anytime I'm dealing with crankshaft and piping, I just personally, I do the same standard thing. I pull down a straight, I pull down an angle, and I pull down a T. There's a bunch of great other shapes, but I just grab those as needed. Okay, I'm going to grab this straight, and then you notice if you hover over these connections, the hint will tell you what it is. So that is the exhaust, which is a fluid output. That is the out coolant, which is a fluid output. This is the in coolant, which is a fluid input. That is the fuel, which is a fluid input, and then this is the air, which is a fluid input. Air is considered fluid. So, and of course there's RPS, which is again the crank or the power, and that is an output. So we need to hook all of this up. How do we want to do this? Well, let's do the easy part first, which is the crankshaft. I'm going to start with a T because for charging the battery, we are going to want an alternator. So let me place the T, and we're going to run a small generator off the top of this, but that comes later. Let's grab an elbow, and come on, place the elbow. And then we need to grab a clutch. This allows us to engage and disengage power. I'm okay with the alternator being engaged all the time. It will put a little resistance on the engine, but not a lot. And then gearbox. Apparently I'm still suffering from the throat tickles here. Gearboxes, you can see there's the blue arrow and sort of the black cap on the end. If the arrow is pointing away from the source, it is gearing down. We'll talk about this more in a minute. So essentially, it will output fewer revolutions on the output side, but more torque, essentially more power, if your power is not defined by revolutions. And then if you were to put it in the other direction, which there are many cases when you want to face it toward the power source like that, the opposite would happen. It would produce more RPMs on the outside, but less torque. However, your engine pays for it on the supply side with more torque demand. So we're going to place 2 gearboxes, both facing outward. And we got a clutch, and we can just go ahead. Let's just grab a generator, small. This will constantly charge our battery while the engine's running. So basically there's our drivetrain, good to go. But now we got these other things. So I'm going to grab my tube again, remind myself what's what. There is coolant, fuel, air. Cooling is very important. If these engines get too hot, they will burn out and catch fire. I will show you this in a minute. But so we got coolant in and coolant out. There are a couple different ways to do coolant. I'm going to do the cheap and dirty way, which is just to push seawater through. Now, there is a risk in pushing seawater through as coolant because it will cause something called scaling. That's because you're putting basically saltwater brine. It's getting heated up. That will leave a mark, so to speak. So we are going to, but I'm accepting that for this boat because it's not exactly a boat I would do long haul missions on anyway. If some scaling builds up on the engine, I'm probably going to despawn it pretty soon anyhow. and so scaling is not exactly a big concern in this particular build. If I was building a ship that has to travel great distances over longer amounts of time, that scaling buildup is a very real possibility, I would feel differently about pumping seawater straight in. Let's grab a pump, just the little one. It's very simple, electric, but plenty adequate for this. Now the pump sort of has that fancy end. The fancy end is the output. So like that. And we'll just pump coolant in. It will also push it out. If we needed a real high performance system, we could do it on both sides. We don't need a real high performance system, so we're not going to do that. And then one nice thing about not having a super round bottom is that we can actually just put a fluid port down here and just suck the water right up. So let's get a fluid, what is it called? Fluid port, exactly with the words I said. And let's place that. There, and pipe it up. So that will suck the water from the ocean. Cold water gets pumped into the coolant inlet, comes out of the coolant outlet, and we can it's more efficient to expel it above the water line. I guess we could do that. I wasn't going to, but no reason not to. Just because there is some resistance pressure when I could pump it out the bottom, but let's be optimal because we can. The hull design will not always accommodate this. There we go. And that might be underwater anyways, but whatever. We gave it a chance. I'll also mention, particularly since this is always going to be sealed and invisible, I do like to bring in color here. So I will color my hot light blue. So I'm selecting light blue here. I'm going to grab the paintbrush tool. It should be on the first, which is just the basic brush. And now I can come in here and click. And then my cold water I will do with the punchier, darker blue. This just means that in the future, when I reference this, I know exactly what's what at a glance. In my fancier builds, like if you are going to see it very often, I will just do the first and last connection in the code color and use my either, a copper pipe color or stainless type color to fill it in. But again, this particularly case, it's going to be fully encased and you'll never see it. So back to pipes. We have fuel, exhaust, and air. Air is a tricky one because if the air inlet pulls, we could put an air inlet over here, but if it sucks in seawater, your engine will begin to flood and can stall out and be rendered useless. So we want to grab air from as high a place as we can. And for me on this boat, like we could pump it like back here, but very often waves kind of wash over the back. We could put it way up here, but waves also kind of wash over the front. So what I think is a great place is actually up here in the what I would call the driver passenger cabinet, which is this section here. So what I'm actually going to do is, and I usually just leave air white or very light gray, is we're going to run this air pipe like here. So let's do it. I could use a section plane if we wanted to, but we don't need to. There is a little bit of distance resistance through the pipe, but this isn't long enough to merit adding a pump for the air. Now, we are going to have this issue where we need this compartment to be, you know, watertight so that it remains a floating compartment. So for this pass-through up here, we are just going to go back to our basic shapes, and right next to the pipe straight is a straight enclosed, just like right next to the pipe angle is an angle enclosed. So I'm going to grab our straight enclosed, and now we can go here, and that gives us a fully sealed pass-through. And then we can just finish it out. And then in here, we can do the same thing. Well, except in this case, we don't need the pass-through. We need that. And then we can put the pipe in. You have to have some sort of intake. It could be an air filter or different things, but you can't just have open-ended pipe. It won't suck up or put out anything. It treats open-ended pipes like closed pipes because they also won't leak. So there's that in the cabinet there. Where I'm going with this is it'll be like this. There we go. So now we have an air intake that's in a pretty good place. I mean, it is possible for water to wash over this, but of anywhere in the boat, it's the least likely to wash there. What have you got left for fluid connectors? We have exhaust and we have fuel. Both of those are pretty easy. We have a couple options with exhaust. We could do it boringly and run it just like we did. Give it just a little fluid port. What I'm going to do is be a little bit fancy. And I'm going to, this is sort of unnecessary, but I do enjoy, as I mentioned, making things nice sometimes. Okay. And then we'll do this, and it is sealed. Now we'll come over here, we'll grab a exhaust pipe. Fluid exhaust, put that there, and bazinga. So then we just need to connect those two up to each other. Do that. We know in advance that we're going to need to do this. I don't know if that's going to be high enough, so let's just find it out. Exhaust, I like to use either a silver color or a dirty color. So let's do that. Some people might use a rust color because like heat stress, but whatever you want. It's your own standard. I will grab the paintbrush to finish out the pieces that did not get colored. And that is exhaust. Also doesn't need a pump unless you're in a particular situation. Last of all, we have fuel. Fuel. So I'm a little worried that, well, I don't know how our balance has changed. So what I'm going to actually do before I add the fuel tanks, and I'm sure we're going to have to add more ballast blocks, but before I add the fuel tanks, let's go ahead and reseal our compartments and drop this thing back in the water. But before we do, let us save this. I have to click new save item. I might have already made one, so recreational boat 2. Now let's spawn it in and kind of see how it sits on the water. Because now we're starting to think about weight. It is definitely still high in the stern, so I'm going to try to keep the fuel tanks as far back as possible. I'm probably going to still end up adding weights back there. So let's go in here, and I think I'll bust out the section plane for this one, which is the blue axis. Nope, I could do the blue axis, but it's the green axis. There we go. All right, so let's grab some fuel tanks. Start with tank. We're going to do the medium. It says fluid tank because it doesn't necessarily have to have fuel in it. And also, oops, Also, my personal standard is bright red for fuel. So I'm going to do that. So this takes 2 blocks up. I'm going to go a little crazy, and I'm going to put 4. Let me rotate that to. I could have done symmetry on this, but a lot of it is going to be not symmetrical. So 4. Now we haven't done this yet, but the arrow here, the selection tool, you can actually click on the fuel tank and you can see it is indeed set to be diesel and full. You can change it to other liquids. Now that will add a significant amount of weight to the back. So I'm actually going to go ahead and spawn it in again and make sure I didn't mess it up. Wow, it's still slightly forward, but emphasis on the word slightly. So I'm pretty happy with that. We're still gonna have to ballast it in the back. The thing is really front heavy. Okay, so we're good with the 4 fuel tanks. We need to connect them up to each other, and I'm just gonna do it this way. Now remember when I said that I don't load up every kind of pipe, but if I have a special need, I'll do it. This is a special need. I want this, the pipe angled corner. Then I can come in here. It's really dark because of the section plane. And then boom, that's nice. And come back here with the straights. Come on, really? Smart snapping isn't always smart. And actually I need that odd piece again. Now we may or may not have time, but we can definitely have a fuel meter, a fuel gauge to tell us how much fuel we have, how much fuel we have left. We can even get really fancy. We wouldn't do it for a boat like this, but mission critical stuff, you can also calculate your burn, how many minutes at your current rate it gives you. There's all kinds of fun stuff that's possible. If I press the right key, increase the fun stuff that's possible. Come on. Okay, cool. So now we have fuel. We don't need a pump for fuel in this case. There are some cases where that is advisable, but this is pretty level, pretty small. So really the only pump we needed is that coolant pump. That is almost everything an engine needs except for power. So let's grab ourselves a battery. You could probably get away with a small. I'm going to grab a medium because we'll be overpowered. And I'll put that right on the other side of the bulkhead here. Now we need to learn about like wiring this stuff up. Let me turn off section plane because it's just kind of annoying. And then up at the top, one of the tools we haven't talked about is logic. It's this light bulb. If we click on that, life changes dramatically. Now this is another opportunity people have to be mistakenly terrified and intimidated because it can look like a lot. You open up some of these other builds that are very involved and it's straight up terrifying. I still open builds that I consider straight up terrifying. But basically, you notice that the left rail has changed from colors to this data, composite, electric, video, audio, and rope situation. For the most part, early on, all we're going to concern ourselves with is data and electric. So let's click on electric, and you can see our powerable nodes. And you can see there's our battery, and then there's things that could need power. So I'm going to just click on the plus at the battery and drag, and you see the line that it creates. Now I could just connect that up and we're good to go. It makes a very satisfying sound, and you can repeat the process to undo it. However, because we have a whole bunch of things to connect, I'm going to drag, hold control, and go ahead and do them all very quickly. Now you can daisy chain these. So for example, I could have run this to this and then that to that. But it is possible for something to consume a lot of power and pass on not enough to the next item. That's unlikely in the case of rudders, but in general, I'm in the practice of just direct wiring everything, so that does not rise up as an issue, because that is a real interesting one to troubleshoot. So now everything is powered, but you may have noticed we have no way to turn this thing on or drive it or anything. So let's work on that. We have a couple options when it comes to this. Let's change our colors here. There's different kind of seats: compact pilot seat, a driver's seat, a helm, a pilot seat, a pilot seat. Now, one might be very tempted to think that a helm is a way to go here, and it certainly is a valid option. There's a lot of good reasons to not use a helm also. Specifically because we're imitating those sort of pleasure craft that were made to look and feel like cars, I'm going to go ahead and grab the driver's seat with the steering wheel and put that in. Will that let us, if I remove the blocks, that let me put it forward? I don't care. So let me put that in there, and then let's grab the seat without any controls. It's a passenger seat, and let's... So there we go. That should look kind of familiar, you know, that basic pleasure craft. So I'm not sure why they usually have the driver on the right-hand side if they're trying to be familiar, since in the US we drive on the left, but whatever. So there's the driver's seat. Now the driver's seat, we will see if we go back to Logic. No, we won't. Yes, we will. We have to go to Logic and go to Data. There's all these different colors. What do they mean? Well, if you hover over them, they will explain themselves. We don't want to mess with that one. You can see hotkey 4. That's literally when the number 4 is pressed on the keyboard, it will send a, as indicated by the red pill there, an on-off signal to something. Or if we hover over the green, we can see axis AD. So like the WASD keys, the AD key, which is typically left and right to us, put out a number between -1 and 1 if you look carefully at the little hint text right there. Although this is customizable, which is going to come in handy. A lot of things that are variable in Stormworks run in a range, not from 0 to 1, but from -1 to 1, with 0 being in the middle. Okay, so the seat is what is going to get us things like steering. We just looked at A and D. We could actually drag this, hold control because we want to do it twice, and run it to those two rudders. Now, I don't think the seat needs power. No, it doesn't. So the rudders are powered and the seat is hooked up. So if we were to spawn this, come over here, make a risky jump. There we go. We can press F to sit on the seat, press tab to get an outside view. And now let's look at those rudders. And you can see A and D, the rudders are turning. This is starting to feel for real. Press B to go back to the workbench. Now you might have noticed that the rudders turned rather slowly. We can tweak that, and certainly when we're doing our C trials, that's the whole point. We tweak things. We can go back to that selection tool. We can click on there, and you see all these options over here. And right at the top is A and D. We could give it a label, and we definitely want to, because I will show you. We'll give it the label rudder. Now it was a little bit laggy or sluggish, so I'm going to go ahead and bump the sensitivity up to 20%. We do want to keep it at reset. Reset means that when we let go of A and D, it will recenter. If we put it on sticky, it would hold whatever position we left it at, which in many cases is what we want. For example, the throttle. We don't want the throttle drifting back to 0. We want it staying wherever we left it. So I labeled this rudder, increased our sensitivity. Let me respawn it. Make another risky jump. All right. Press F, press tab. And you can see much more responsive rudder, maybe too responsive. That's something we can tweak when we're actually running around. But also note on the bottom left-hand corner, it says driver's seat, A and D, rudder. It gave us the hint because we labeled the thing. Please, 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 anytime you hook something up to the seat, for the love of Pete, label it so we know what it means, what it does. I see a lot of features not being labeled. It drives me insane. Okay, so we've got rudder going, but we need to start this thing. Now there is a key block, but the key block automatically doesn't play nicely with small pre-built engines. So I'm going to grab a push button, place that, hit K. There we go. So now we have a button that we can use for starting. And if we go back to our logic, we can see that the donuts are inputs and the dots, the donut holes, are outputs. And you can see that because the little gray pill there says output, and the little gray pill there says input, and it's an on-off type. And we know that green are numbers and red are on-off types. So when this button is pressed, we want it to turn the starter. So we'll drag this, and if we hover over these things, thankfully they're labeled, this is the starter. So excellent. But we can't even begin to start the engine until we have a throttle. So let's go back to here. Let's make a space for it. I know how big it's going to be, so I'm going to make it, and then it's throttle. Now, placing throttles has a little gotcha because you'll notice that your brain is going to make you want to put the light on the upside, but the light should actually be on the downside if you look at the positive and negative. Once you place it, it does what you expect it to do. Anyway, so now positive up, negative is down. Perfecto. We can actually go back to our selector, click on the throttle, and you see that it has a minimum value of 0, a maximum value of 1, extreme sensitivity, and a start value of 0. Because our engine needs more than 0 throttle to even start, I'm going to put it at 0.16. That might not be a good number, but that's a good guess. Also, if we go back to electricity, first rule of Stormworks, do electricity first. I don't think we actually have to electrify the button. It's for backlighting, I believe, but I will electrify it anyway. No skin off my nose. And then we have to switch back to logic, and we see that there is a throttle output number, and we will drag that to the throttle input number on the engine. So now we can give the engine throttle commands. If we spawn in, sit in a chair. Now it is, if you hover over it, it is throttled to 0.16 already because that's what we set it as the initial value. Hold that down for a second. I can hear it running. We don't have a tachometer or anything to validate that, but we'll get there. We also can't put it in gear, so we're not going to go anywhere. So there it is running. It might be running too high. It's running pretty high. You can run it higher by pushing this up red arrow. And it's on fire. I told you, they can get hot. Oh boy. So, why is this happening? Well, if we had a heat sensor on it, we would learn, or heat gauge, it was overheating in a hot hurry. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The reason being, our pump was not, and even though it had power, it was not in fact running. If we go back to logic, data, data. If we go back to data and look at our pump, it has an input of on-off. So we could just run like from the 1 key, we could run that over here and just turn on the cooling when we press the 1 key. Or if we basically want it to run all the time non-stop, one of our options would be a constant on. So I'm going to hit tab, type in constant, and you see you have a constant number and a constant on. I'm just going to grab one because and you can see this little guy, and I'm just going to go inside, I don't know, inside the cabinet here. Just drop it. Come on, it doesn't like, there we go. And now if we go back to logic, this thing simply puts out an on signal all the time. Drag that to that. And now this obviously could be draining power when you don't want it to, but this is overly simplistic, showing you how to do it. We could do that. If we want to get smarter, we could set up a logic situation where the pump pumps harder, the hotter the engine gets, blah, blah, blah. But this is a simple way to get it going. Now the engine won't catch fire as easy as we just saw it catching fire, because it'll actually have a functional active cooling system. But there is another problem. If we were to jump in the seat and want to cruise around, we would have to actually tap on that up arrow, and that is really annoying. Wouldn't it be easier to just control it with the W and S keys? Well, the final thing we're going to do here is make that possible. However, if you notice, I think it's right here. Yes, W and S outputs a number, but throttle doesn't take a number. Throttle does take an on-off on the up and an on-off on the down. So we have a fundamental incompatibility here. Whatever do we do? The solution lies in your first deep dive into microcontrollers. Technically, this is kind of a controller, but the microcontrollers made by the community. So if you go to, it's actually, because I've already subscribed to it, it's going to be in my library here. If I go all the way down, there's the microcontrollers I've made, but then there's the workshop microcontrollers, and there is one called Pilot Seat Throttle Logic. I'm sure there's many others like it, but this is the one I use. I'm not sure who the creator is, but if you search this phrase, you will find it and you will know who the creator is. And as you can see, it takes a number input and it outputs an on-off up and an on-off down, which, wouldn't you know it, is exactly what we need. Now, I could go and hide this underneath the deck or inside the cabinet here, but if you can hide a microcontroller in plain sight as a decorative item, it's form and function, right? So let's see. Okay, so I'm just going to make this look like a cushion for the passenger, and I can give it a paint that supports that concept, but it is a microcontroller. So now, if we go back to logic, we see that the microcontroller takes a number. So we're going to give it the W and S, and it puts out on off up. We'll drag that to up, and on off down. We will drag that to down. Now I believe there is a gotcha here where we have to make sure that the W and S is not reset, that it's sticky, and that it is 100%. It's just a requirement of the thing. We also want to label this throttle so it will come up in our operator hints. Okay, so let's go ahead and save it since it's been a minute and respawn that in the water. And I'll probably realize that I forgot something, but you don't have to power microcontrollers. So let's jump. Let's sit down. Theoretically, our pump is running right now for cooling the engine. Again, we have that throttle already going, so we'll just hold that down for a second. I can hear the engine revving. Now look at the throttle. If I tap W, whoa, okay, maybe I was wrong about the sensitivity thing. It will kill the engine by going all the way down. We don't have like a clamp to keep it from going all the way off. So I was mistaken in what I just told you. Let me go back, hit my selector. Let's go back to W and S. Sensitivity is, I'm wondering now if it's supposed to be sticky. maybe it was 100% and reset. I've installed a lot of these, so this is a little embarrassing that I'm forgetting, but we can sort it out forthwith. I don't even need to start the engine. Yeah, okay. So what I just did was right. All right. So, yes, 100% sticky, but yes, 100% sensitivity, but no to the sticky, because we're not sending information to the throttle, really. We're sending information to the microcontroller. That's translating it through the throttle. All right, so the only thing keeping us from driving now is our clutch and gearbox situation. So if we click on the gearbox, I'm just going to move through this really quickly. There is ratios. So ratio off is the default. It's how it begins. Ratio on is what you get when it's activated. 1 to 1, obviously for every turn of the crankshaft, it outputs a turn of the gearbox. If we go thusly, we see 6 to 5, which means for every 6 turns of the crankshaft, there will be 5 turns of the drive shaft. And so you gain, there's less RPSs, but you gain power. So what I'm going to do is actually go -1 on that one. So this will be just straight pass through by default, but if you activate it, it becomes a reverse gear. Second throttle, by default, we want it to do something gentle, like a 5 to 9, or 9 to 5 rather. And then when it's engaged, something aggressive like a 1 to 1. Okay, cool. But we need to tell these things when to engage. Wow. And to do that, notice that they take a on-off. And as it happens, our seat has on-offs via the hotkey 1 and hotkey 2. Now, because we changed hotkeys, remember, please label them. So we go back to hotkey 1 and we label it reverse gear. And it is a toggle. And we go to hotkey gear 2, we high gear, and it also is a toggle. We are missing one thing though, and that is the clutch. Let's go back to logic, and notice though the clutch isn't an on-off as you might expect, but it's between a value between 0 and 1. That's because you can slip clutch. So that is okay, but how do we do that? Well, I'm actually going to use the up-down arrow, which is one of these. Yep, axis 4. Drag that down. Now, it is pretty tedious slipping a clutch from pilot seat, unless that's what you want to do. So I'm going to select the pilot seat again. I'm going to go to that up-down arrow, and I'm actually going to make its sensitivity. First of all, it needs to be sticky because we don't want it changing the clutch as soon as we let go of the key, but I'm going to make it 100%. So basically the up-down arrow becomes a toggle to engage and disengage the clutch by making that sensitivity 100%. That means if I so much as tap the up arrow, it becomes a value of 1, which is 100% engaged. Let's label that as clutch. All right, I think if I'm not missing anything, we are going to be able to get in motion. Let's save it again. Spawn it. In the driver's seat, push the button. I hear the engine starting. Sometimes if you push it too fast, it won't, the engine won't catch. All right, this is good. You can see a little side vent spitting out coolant water. That's cool. We're not at all balanced. We'll worry about that later. And then if we just push the up arrow, give it some W because we need some throttle. It almost stalled out. So we engaged our clutch, so we have power. We pressed W so that we throttled up to 100%. And that's it. We can steer with our probably slightly over touchy steering. So that's fun. If it's backwards, you can either flip around your installation of the fins, or you can actually just use a number reverser. It's just like the constant number. It's one of the preset microcontrollers. and it will simply, you know, turn a -1 into a 1 and a 1 into a -1. You just run your number through that and your steering will come out right. And we have a high gear, right? Let's test that. Nice. This is how we can make some time here. Very cool. Just looks like your classic Chris Craft, Sea-Doo boats. We can do a lot of things to make this aesthetically more pleasing, but we now have power and control, which is very important. And I'm pretty happy with our buoyancy, actually. That's not shabby at all. Let's see, hit 2 to put it in low gear. Let's press S a few times to bring the power down. Let's push down arrow to disengage the clutch. Let's press 1 to test reverse gear, up arrow to engage the clutch again. And look at that, down to disengage the clutch. It works. 1, put it back in forward gear. Whoa, anyway, yay! So we can go back and forth. All right, that is it for video number 2. There will be a video number 3. That is when we will put some gauges on here, paint it, do some finishing touches, add some nice aesthetics, and make this a boat we can be truly proud of. Add a few details we forgot, like a refueling port, and then it'll be done, and you will have your first and fantastic creation in Stormworks. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.